of Victoria Ibeze Moheri, and who is unavoidably absent. I would like to welcome everyone to this exotic meeting, where we are going to be having meaningful conversations that will shape the future of Africa in the fight against terrorism. Spaces for Change's central message in the fight to counter terrorism is that counter-terrorism measures deployed by state actors should not close the civic space. Human rights and national security are interdependent and mutually reinforcing objectives. In other words, human rights must lie at the center of efforts to preserve the security of African states in line with the common African defense and security policy and within the spirit of finding African security solutions. Counterterrorism efforts in Africa have intensified, particularly in the sub-region, following the increase in terrorism-related deaths. Evidence has shown that sub-Saharan Africa recorded the largest increase in terrorism deaths, rising by 8% in 2022 compared to the 2021 deaths rate. This is by the Global Terrorism Index. The African Union have also acknowledged that the resurgence of unconstitutional change of government, the expanding threats of terrorism and violent extremism across the continent, including the influx of foreign terrorist fighters, private military companies and mercenaries, the proliferation of armed groups, as well as transnational organized crimes, negatively impact the peace, security, stability, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of some member states. The countermeasures adopted by countries, though well-intended, have produced certain negative consequences, adversely impacting human rights of civilian populations while constraining the civic space across the continent. It is therefore our duty as civil society organizations to continue to work for the protection of the civic space by ensuring the application of homegrown measures applicable to Africans in Africa. We must secure access and engagement with government, regional bodies, and other actors in the civic space, and also invest in capacity building, research, and knowledge building. When we are effectively armed with these tools, we will be able to defend, promote, and protect human rights and shape the Africa that we want and that works for Africans. It is our hope at Spaces for Change, as co-organizers of this conference, that we will achieve our objectives of reviewing the counter-terrorism measures of African states, evaluate the effectiveness of these measures, and to formulate measures that suits Africans in the protection of human rights in Africa. We also hope that you will have a good time in this conference and also in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And just to add a little, Spaces for Change has this research work that I would want to encourage everyone to grab a copy of it. I have displayed it at the exhibition stand. It's a very good research report that is also going to help, formulate ideas for these events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And please grab a copy, as I've brought some of their publications. Very briefly, Rosette, so that we can then welcome Professor Ben Saul, and then to the Right Honorable former Prime Minister. Very briefly, please.
Thank you very much, Hussein. His Excellency, former Prime Minister, Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, the UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Ben Saul, the Commissioner, African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Dr. Lorin, and Director, National Counterterrorism Center, Rosalind Nyawira, our sponsor, Open Society, George Kagora, and most definitely AU representative, Christopher Kayoshe. I want to say thank you very much for gracing us, and good morning to everyone in this conference. My name is Rosette Ocho. I believe the former directors from each organization has basically said everything. So I had a well-written speech, but noting that I've been told to be as brief as possible, I'll just want to touch on one very important thing as we deal with counterterrorism. As a youth of Africa, as a youth from Kenya, I believe that we are abused. Most of the time, terrorists use us. They use us, they abuse the social media platforms that we normally use. And as a youth, today I want to say that we need to have our voices counted. As a youth in Kenya, as a youth from Africa, please don't sit down and watch. We are the leaders of today, and we are the leaders of tomorrow. So as we have this conference today and tomorrow, kindly, the youth in this room, let's try and participate. Terrorism requires a multifaceted approach. And as youth, if your voices are not heard, they will not know whatever is troubling us. As we can see, we have people from different organizations. We have government here, we have the African Union, and we also have civil society. So indeed, terrorism requires a multifaceted approach. So if we take this approach and if we give our ideas as we tackle terrorism and how to handle it together with human rights, I believe as Africa we will go far. And as our motto in Vocal Africa, we need to have one Africa, one voice. I think with that, without much further ado, I'll just say thank you and karibuni Kenya. Asanteni sana.
We've had a slight change of the program, and we'd like to all request participants to kindly stand as we welcome our chief guest for the keynote speech, the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, so that he can come to issue the keynote speech. And then we will have a few words also from
Now you may be seated. The organizers of the conference, distinguished guests, all protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am very delighted to have an opportunity to come and join you here this morning. I'm pressed for time because I have another engagement, but I'm very happy to see people who have come from different parts of the continent come here, gather in Nairobi, the city in the sun, to talk about a very fundamental issue. Let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this meeting, the UN Special Rapporteur, Ben Saul's office, Vocal Africa, Spaces for Change, Haki Africa, and Civic Advisory Hub for such an important gathering. At this gathering, I'm reminded of the profound responsibility that we carry as leaders and representatives of our beloved continent. As a continent, Africa is brimming with diversity, rich culture, and boundless potential. We want to add here that Africa is the richest continent on the planet Earth as far as the resources are concerned. It's a paradox. The richest is also the poorest when it comes to the living conditions of the people and also the issues of human rights. We are a continent that has weathered storms of adversity, emerged triumphant from the shackles of colonialism, and stood resilient in the face of daunting post-independent obstacles and challenges. Despite our resilience, we continue to grapple with the persistent threats of terrorism and the imperative of upholding human rights for all our citizens. Terrorism, in its many forms, seeks to destabilize our nations, undermine our democratic institutions, and sow seeds of fear and division among our people. It preys on the vulnerable, exploits the marginalized, and seeks to extinguish the flame of hope that burns within every African heart. But let us be clear. Terrorism shall find no sanctuary on our shores, and we shall not falter in our resolve to combat this scourge with every fiber of our being. However, in our unwavering pursuit of security and stability, we must never lose sight of the fundamental principles that define our humanity. Human rights are not negotiable. They are the cornerstone upon which our societies are built and the bedrock upon which our collective features rest. We cannot and must not sacrifice the rights and dignity of our people at the altar of security. Instead, we must strive for a balanced approach that ensures the safety of our citizens while upholding their inherent rights and freedoms. As I seek to become the chair of the African Union, given the opportunity, I pledge to lead with integrity, compassion, and a steadfast commitment to advancing the twin objectives of human rights and counterterrorism. I will work tirelessly to strengthen the capacity of our member states to combat terrorism through coordinated efforts, intelligence sharing, and targeted interventions. Simultaneously, I intend to champion initiatives that promote respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, foster inclusivity, and empower our citizens to become agents of positive change in their communities. The struggle for promoting human rights while countering terrorism is no mean task to be achieved by any one individual. It must be a collective effort. I call upon each and every one of you, representatives of civil society organizations from across the continent, to join hands with the UN, states, the AU, and all of us in this noble endeavor. Your voices are powerful catalysts for change. Your advocacy indispensable in shaping policies that reflect the aspirations and values of the African people. Together, let us forge a path towards a safer, more just, and prosperous Africa for all. In closing, let us draw inspiration from the resilience of our forebears, the courage of those who have dared to dream, and the collective strength of our society diversity. The journey ahead may be fraught with challenges, but I am confident that with unity, determination, and an unwavering commitment to our shared values, we shall prevail. With these remarks, I declare the conference open, as I also welcome you to Nairobi and our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baba. Thank you very much, Professor Ben Saul. From the United Nations, kindly, your remarks, as we then welcome the entertainment to come in. Baba has to unfortunately make his way, but we welcome you, Professor Ben Saul, to say a word or two, please.
unity when combating terrorism is the right thing, create new generations of terrorists. Now, regrettably, in the last 2 decades, since in my office, every week we receive complaints from victims, their lawyers, NGOs, about the ways in which counter-terrorism laws are
individuals from arbitrary detention and other abuses. Ladies and gentlemen, that notwithstanding, we know that terrorism has become an industry. It is an industry with supply and demand actors, some of whom are supposed to be part of the solution. And this begs the question. At the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, we consistently emphasize that all individuals, including those accused of the most heinous crimes, are entitled to the protection of their fundamental rights. This includes the right to legal representation, the right to be informed of charges, and the right to prompt and fair trial by an independent and impartial tribunal. Torture and ill treatment in particular are absolutely prohibited under both the regional and international law. The prohibition of torture is a preemptory norm of international law, meaning it cannot be derogated under any circumstances, including counterterrorism. State parties must ensure that their counterterrorism practices do not involve torture or other forms of ill treatment, and that allegations of such abuses are promptly and throughout investigated. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, we are confident we are confronted with persistent and evolving threats. We must do all that is under our powers to make sure that we are committed to the human rights and rule of law of our countries. Our actions must reflect values enshrined in the African Union Charter and other regional and international institutions. I call upon all state parties to the African Charter to affirm their commitment to these principles. Let us ensure that our counterterrorism measures are not effective in only protecting security, but also in upholding the dignity and rights of all individuals. By doing so, we will strengthen our societies, build trust with our citizens, and create a resilient front against the forces of terror. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights stands ready to support you in this endeavor. Together, let us forge a path that honors our shared humanity and our collective commitment to justice, peace, and human dignity. I thank you.
Not too much trouble, we can get your speech and then we can make copies for participants, those who may want to read and understand what has just been said here in details. So thank you so much. Without further ado, I would like to welcome the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. They mainly work on preventing and countering violent extremism. Just to clarify that, not directly counterterrorism, preventing and countering violent extremism. And they've been working very well with civil society. If you will remember, they've done the national strategy on preventing and countering violent extremism in Kenya. They went ahead to devolve those strategies to the sub-national, that is at the county level. As we speak, all the 47 counties presently have strategies to prevent and counter violent extremism. Dr. Nyawira has been at the core of that work, and she continues to work with different actors in the efforts to ensure the country is safe by preventing and countering violent extremism. Karibu, Daktari, so that you can give us your welcoming remarks. A warm welcome as she steps forward, please. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Right Honorable Raila Odinga, the Professor Benso, the UN Special Rapporteur, my colleagues from the African Union, Dr. Litha Christopher Kayoshe, my colleagues, practitioners in the prevention and countering of violent extremism space. I stand before you here this morning with a background on human rights and humanitarian law, just to say that human rights, and I'm talking to a human rights practitioner audience, accrue to all of us as human beings, and we are equal, as we all know from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but sometimes the question begs, are we equal? We all know that we are equal, but we come in a variety of groups influenced by genetics and environment. We grow up in varied spaces with different climate and socio-cultural norms. We carry bias with narrow worldviews that fail to recognize the diversity of everyone, and we want to fit everyone into a local frame. And therefore, we struggle with equality and inequality and equity in the sharing of power and resources. Conflict has been second nature to man. Men and women have been adjudged as inherently selfish, wanting everything for ourselves. And the regime of human rights that we pride ourselves in today is actually premised on the bloodshed, especially of the 2 world wars, where Europe was a theater of massacre. But this does not preclude the previous wars and the blatant disregard of rights seen throughout the history of humanity. If I be narrowed down to terrorism, and to be specific, the kind of terrorism that has manifested, especially in our region in Africa in the last 3 decades, it is intertwined with intolerant ideologies that shape individuals within communities to hate those who are not part of the in-group. This hatred grows almost in a discernible pattern and leads to violence. In his book on the psychology of terrorism, Andrew Sick says that violent extremism is not simply about physical suffering, it's about making a psychological impact. It's about psychology, about the creation of a wider sense of terror, and partly about winning a psychological battle of hearts and minds. So inevitably, counterterrorism must also not just be in the physical space, but also have the psychological dimension to be effective. And ignoring the psychology of terrorism is to miss the crux of the problem. But let's have a discussion on the salient issues that when we think about terrorism and human rights, we need to boldly delve into the issue that we deal with. When human beings want to justify violence against others, the first thing they do is dehumanize. They dehumanize the people that they want to attack, while extolling themselves of being of a better pedigree. And these terrorists have done by using inanimate terminology to refer to others as pigs and dogs, so that to refer to what they consider the outgroup, so that if they are not human, then they have no right, especially they have no right to live, and therefore it is justifiable to kill them. Terrorists also do not care for human or humanitarian rights while carrying out their campaigns. The battlefield is very uneven. It gives undue advantage to them. They can target civilians with no regard to distinction or proportionality. They use human shields because they know that counter-terrorist actors, mostly being states abode by rules of humanitarian law. And this, in turn, gives a temptation to the counter-terrorist actors to repay in equal measure. Counter-terrorism can be motive. Terrorists do not just dehumanize their direct victims because their modus operandi is so unregulated, it's gruesome, it attacks savage counteraction. A soldier in battle seeing his compatriot and friend blown up in pieces or decapitated can experience temporary insanity and deep-seated trauma and hatred. The Mosaic concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is enlivened. This can be directed at the terrorists, of course, but also at others that may, by whatever kind of affiliation, innocent or otherwise, are perceived to be related to the terrorists. Terrorists also use intelligence to plan and execute their attacks, and in many jurisdictions, the technicalities of the crime of terrorism have not been appreciated. It is highly compartmentalized. One may plan but not execute the attack, yet he is privy to the entire plan. One may move explosives but not make the suicide best, yet he will know that in the process of moving explosives, they are for a nefarious purpose, most likely to blow up people. Proving both the mens rea and the actus reus can be an uphill task, and the evidential threshold of beyond reasonable doubt may sometimes seem unachievable, thus discouraging action within the criminal justice system. Terrorism is also very expensive. The hardware and the software of it, the cost of human lives, calls for alternative means. That said, it has been proven that abuse of human rights begets more violence and more abuse. It's a vicious cycle. It actually brings competition on the abusers to outdo each other. It spreads fear, increases hatred, overflows to the innocent and vulnerable, and causes more polarization and feeds into the narrative of terrorism. So what do we do then to ensure that we are not trying to match the violence of the terrorists, but are actually stopping the violence? We must seek to operate within constitutional criminal justice system, make laws that take cognizance of the challenges that come with prosecuting terrorism. In Kenya, for instance, the Prevention of Terrorism Act has been amended to take cognizance of the fact that investigating terrorism takes time. An arrest may have to be made prematurely to disrupt a planned attack. The law that provides that while suspects must be presented to court within 24 hours of arrest, the courts can grant delays of lawful detention upon request to allow for further investigation. It's also important to bring all agencies dealing with terrorism together to ensure that they ride on each other's strength in defending and disrupting terrorist acts. And Kenya has done very well on this multi-agency approach. But most importantly, and this is what we do for our organization a day to day, we must immunize communities against violent ideologies that let them understand. We must let them understand how terrorists operate. We must let them understand their strategic vision and their tactics. We must let communities take it upon themselves to identify gaps within which that are exploited by violent extremists. The strategy we implement that countering violent extremism is a plan of action that rallies communities through networks. We have networks of women, we have male mentorships, we have youth networks, psychological support groups, interfaith groups, and national actors, political or otherwise, that give effect to the meaning of, to the county action plans that every county has in this country to deal with the violent extremism. And this is coordinated with a very wide component of sector called the County Engagement Forum, made up of civil society, the media practitioners, the security actors, community leaders, faith leaders, educators, women, the youth, everyone in the society, into what is not just a critique but a practical exercise of the whole of society approach. It is both sustainable and cost-effective. It is important to know that communities have the power to resist violent extremism if they're enlightened and supported and coordinated to be the implementers themselves, and states only standing to empower them to know and to support them in this. So we must let them take up that narrative and support them in driving that effort. But it is also very important to mount social, cultural, and economic rights onto the pedestal on which they belong. There has been a lot of emphasis on civil and political rights. While these are important, they are not the only ones that must reach the zenith for equality of human beings. It is very important that we recognize that human rights are not just the civil and political ones, but that it is the socio-economic rights are also a priority, and that states take effort to make sure that they are also achieved. Emphasis ought to be on human security, recognizing that economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, personal security, community security, freedom from fear and want are actually human rights, and they are a formidable weapon against violent extremism. Thank you.
These social and economic rights have a direct impact on security issues that we have. So that's really, really encouraging, Madam. We are very happy with your remarks, and we will continue to support you and to work with you on preventing and countering violent extremism and make our country safe. The chair of the National Commission on Human Rights, apparently there's a marathon and the streets have been closed already and she's running late. So I have taken the chair's prerogative. Kindly allow me, I have my colleagues who've worked extremely hard to make this event a success, to quickly just come before we go to our two main speakers to give us a word or two of welcome. I request you please, Dr. Yona Wanjala, to please come from the Civic Advisory Hub very briefly as we move forward, as we also take this opportunity to see if the National Commission on Human Rights person will get here. And then, of course, we'll have a director from Haki Africa, and we'll have my sister from Spaces for Change very briefly, and of course, Rosette Ocho from Vocal Africa.
Other colleagues, our chief guest, Baba Raila Amolo Odinga, our brother, friend in the human rights family, none other than Professor Ben Saul, our brother from the AU, our sister from the African Commission on Human Rights, Human and People's Rights, our director, City Kenya, and our financial supporter, none other than George Kagoro, and others absent in the House, Ford Foundation, Mod Foundation, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to this inaugural activity and event of the Pan-African Conference, organized by a collective of civil society organization, as making and contributing a brick to countering terrorism in Africa. Can you clap for yourselves? Colleagues, this is a key moment to us to contribute in defining African solutions to African problems. It is a statement that sounds right. It's a statement that sounds appealing, but sometimes we ask ourselves exactly what is the African solution to African problems. When we talk about terrorism, sometimes we so much think about kinetic approaches that instead worsen the situation. But I think we also need, in African solution, to yet consider more preventive approaches that go to the root cause of the problems. Our chief guests, we are happy of the strides you are taking, but I think it's the time again to echo that you associate yourself with some of our pleas as part of the main causes of terrorism in Africa, that the world focuses attention, that Africa is a recruitment ground, Africa is a financing ground. The elements of leadership deficit that Africa needs to address, the elements of failed state that Africa needs to address, the elements of kleptocracy, the elements of glorifying authoritarianism. And I think through this, we shall be addressing the core. We are in this as members of the civil society because we believe that fighting terrorism is a right and a responsibility for all. Gone are the days when it used to be left to the uniformed officers. And in this, I welcome all of us to find a solution, to make a contribution for a peaceful Africa. Thank you and have a good time. Key to it, before you leave, you must have at least over 10 friends that you should network with in this particular event. It's one thing to collaborate, but it's key to network. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein. Our chief guest, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Ben Saul, our sister from the NCTC, Dr. Rosalind Nyawira, our sister from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights on her way, Rosalind Doreen, Dr. Litha Musimi Ogana, Commissioner, African Commission on Human Rights and People's Rights, our brother Christopher Kayoshe from the African Union,